Thank you, colleagues. Our next item of business is a debate on motion 24260 in the name of Miles Briggs on a motion of no confidence. Could I call on Ruth Davidson to speak to and to move the motion?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 3 years ago, 2 women came forward with allegations of sexual harassment against the former First Minister of Scotland. They were women who worked beside him and who, like anyone believing themselves harassed or abused by a senior colleague, felt the power imbalance keenly. Because while these things can be about sex, they are always about power. They didn't report it at the time. He was arguably the most powerful man in the country. And as the current First Minister said in her evidence to the committee, a tough guy to work for. But after the fact, those women did come forward, and we now know that a hastily written HR policy on bullying and harassment and its application let them down. It was unfair, unlawful and tainted by apparent bias. It cost the taxpayer hundreds of thousands of pounds and the women themselves untold injury. So much so that 3 years later, it has never again been tested, despite the FDA union telling the committee that 50% of staff told a workplace survey they had experienced harassment by a colleague. It is a policy that's not been changed, revised or amended, and to have a harassment policy that workers are too afraid to use is a tragedy. But one thing that could strengthen protection is to have an open and honest conversation about what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how it can be made better. And that is what the committee inquiry was set up to do. To have the Parliament, already charged with oversight of the executive, to review a system's failure so that we could fix the system and offer the thousands of people who work for the government proper protection in future. The fact that the committee has been hampered at every turn from receiving even basic information in order to do its job doesn't just let down these women all over again. It lets down current and future government employees too. And that is the context of today's vote of no confidence. So let's review the last few months. On the 4th of November 2020, this chamber voted for the following motion: that the Parliament calls on the Scottish Government to publish all the legal advice it received regarding the judicial review into the investigation of the alleged behaviour of the former First Minister, Alex Salmond. Upon its passage, John Swinney did nothing and missed the deadline set by the Salmond Inquiry Committee of the 13th of November to hand over the information. On 25th of November, another motion was passed by this chamber noting the previous vote and calling on the Scottish Government to respect the will of the Parliament. But still, John Swinney did nothing. It took more than 3 months and the threat of a vote of no confidence in Mr Swinney, which had the votes to win, for his position to suddenly change and a promise of publication to emerge. The Deputy First Minister said, "We will release the key legal advice." The first batch of that advice provided incontrovertible evidence of incompetency on the part of the Scottish Government. It included an urgent note from senior counsel saying the judicial review had a very real problem indeed. The issue that had alarmed counsel so greatly was that they had just learned that the investigating officer had prior contact with the complainers. This revelation was so serious that counsel advised as an option, the issue is disclosed and the petition conceded as a result. It collapsed its own case. This raises the question, why weren't counsel told about this information from the start? The investigating officer said during her evidence session before the Salmond Inquiry, "I was upfront about the contact at the time." So who neglected to tell counsel this vital piece of information at the beginning of the judicial review process? Perhaps the minutes of the consultation from the 11th of September, near the start of the judicial review, would provide some answers. Well, we don't know, because John Swinney will not release any details of that meeting. And despite these damning revelations, the evidence that was released on the 2nd of March, the only legal advice we got to see before the First Minister's appearance at committee, was incomplete. John Swinney would go on to release 11 further documents regarding the judicial review after the First Minister's appearance. 11 documents where the First Minister could not be questioned under oath about these pieces of evidence. One piece, the email chain from the 6th to 7th of December, refers to the First Minister questioning counsel advice to concede the judicial review. If the Scottish Government had taken this advice on the 6th of December and conceded, it would have saved the taxpayer hundreds of thousands of pounds in legal costs. John Swinney withheld this information about the First Minister until after her appearance at the committee. And despite dragging tranches of documents from John Swinney for fear of his job, there still remains key omissions. Mr Swinney will have lots of time during his own time to address these points, and I'll let him get on with them when I sit down. He won't take mine. On the 25th of October, the 2nd of November and 13th of November in 2018, the First Minister was represented either in person or by a member of her staff at consultations with Council regarding the judicial review. In Friday's letter to the Salmond Inquiry Committee, Mr Swinney doesn't mention the 25th of October meeting at all, and he claims that no minutes exist of the 2nd and 13th of November consultations, the latter of which the First Minister attended herself. It is inconceivable that minutes were not taken at a meeting between the Permanent Secretary, the First Minister and the First Minister's Chief of Staff with senior external counsel. And what about the other consultations from the 11th of September 2018, the 23rd of October 2018 or the 3rd of January 2019? No minutes or advice from these consultations have been published either. These omissions in the published evidence make it clear the key legal advice that the Deputy First Minister promised has not been provided. In a note from Council on the 17th of December 2018, they mention a consultation that took place on the 10th of November. Not only have we not been provided with any notes from this consultation, but it doesn't even appear on the Scottish Government's timeline of the judicial review. And who provided that timeline? John Swinney, in a letter on the 26th of October 2020 to the Salmond Inquiry Committee. No wonder the committee has written again to the Deputy First Minister to say it is extremely frustrated and not reassured that it has received all the relevant information. We back the committee. Presiding Officer, we know we won't win today's vote of no confidence. The votes are there for the Deputy First Minister. But we believe that it is important and right to put on record that this is no way for the Scottish Government to treat this Parliament. And while Mr Swinney's outliners will, I'm sure, do a lap of honour in the press, the real losers are Scottish Government employees who have been lumbered with a protection at work policy that everybody knows is damaged goods and that staff are too afraid to use. With a bit of transparency and candour, the committee could have helped work out what went wrong and why. But John Swinney preferred to keep evidence secret at every turn. In a particularly damning note from the 17th of December, Council told the Lord Advocate they could not advise the court that the Scottish Government had discharged its duty of candour. With the way the release of legal advice has been handled, we believe that John Swinney and the Scottish Government have failed in this duty once again. I move the motion in Miles Briggs' name.
Thank you. Can I call Deputy First Minister John Swinney?
Presiding Officer, on the occasions in which motions of confidence are debated, other ministers tend to speak on behalf of the minister in question. Today, I have chosen to speak on my own behalf. The decisions that are under scrutiny in this debate are mine, and it is right that I am accountable to Parliament for them. On the 4th and the 25th of November last year, this chamber debated motions calling on the Government to release its legal advice. On each of those occasions, I set out why Scottish ministers were asserting legal privilege. It is an important tenet of Scots law that protects organisations and individuals alike, allowing them the benefit of frank, confidential advice from lawyers. That is why it is a principle that has been upheld by successive Scottish and United Kingdom governments of different political parties. Ministers' view, my view, was that we could give the committee the information they needed to understand what happened in the judicial review while avoiding the precedent for future governments of waiving privilege. That is why I took the unprecedented decision to share with the committee in confidence in December, and this is where Ruth Davidson is entirely incorrect in what she said, a detailed submission that explained the content of legal advice during the judicial review. I believed then that such an approach could fulfil our obligation to Parliament and the committee without waiving legal privilege and therefore protecting the interests of future governments. Since then, we have seen outlandish allegations of conspiracy and corruption being promoted by people who, frankly, should and do know better. Those tactics require a response. We concluded that the debate those tactics provoked on Parliament's ability to scrutinise the Government and the accusations on which the debate was founded could impact negatively on public confidence in the Parliament, Government and even our judicial institutions. I therefore decided last week that the balance of public interest had shifted and we should publish the advice from Council. That meant that the process of release moved on to its second stage, consideration by the law officers for the first time. They consented to the release. We have moved as quickly as possible through the legal checks, having regard to the statutory obligations involved, before releasing these documents. Members will recognise the importance of those processes, not least to protect the identity of complainers. In releasing information, I kept in mind the committee motion explicitly sought two things: the legal advice of our external counsel, and the associated minutes of meetings relating to the judicial review. The Government has now published all of the formal written advice notes received from external counsel. Indeed, we have also published emails from our senior counsel and an unredacted version of the summary shared with the committee in December. We have also published documentation that includes the legal advice of the law officers. On minutes of meetings, we simply don't have those. We have asked senior counsel whether they have a minute of these meetings. They do not. What I can say, there's an important point I need to put across. What I can say is that the outcomes of these discussions are reflected in the pleadings made to the court by the Government, which we shared with the committee some months ago. The documents we released confirm that in September the clear view of Council was that our prospects were good. They identified risks, these opinions always do, but it was a positive assessment of our case. As time went on and problems emerged, the picture shifted and external counsel became concerned and then alarmed. But as late as a note dated the 11th of December, the Lord Advocate was clear there should be no question of conceding. And even on the 17th of December, external counsel agreed that the case remained stateable. It was the note of counsel of the 19th of December that led directly to the case being conceded. None of this is hidden. In fact, let us be frank about what we have released. It paints a clear picture, warts and all. No embarrassment for the Government is spared in the publication of these documents. Indeed, Presiding Officer, it is worth reflecting for a moment on the significance of what the Government has done in this case. We have taken the extraordinary and unprecedented step of publishing formal legal advice of the kind which no previous government in Scotland has done, and we have done so in response to the request of the committee and motions passed by Parliament. On any fair interpretation of what the Government has done, the Tories' pursuit of this motion today is now entirely baseless. With an election only weeks away, the reality, I suspect, is that they were always intent on pushing this motion to a vote, regardless of what action the Government had taken. I have sought, Presiding Officer, to provide the committee with the information it needed to do its work. Indeed, we have supplied the committee with thousands and thousands of pages of documents. I have sought to ensure the Government and all future governments retained its ability to take frank, unvarnished legal advice, and I have sought to meet my obligations to Parliament. There are always clearly conflicting judgments that have to be resolved amongst those three factors. It is now for this chamber to judge whether those actions, taken in good faith, are sufficient to command their confidence. This Government has accepted, since January 2019, that mistakes were made in the handling of these complaints. As a result, 2 women were badly let down. The Government must and will learn lessons from those mistakes.
Thank you. Can I call on Jackie Bailey?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Before I turn to the substance of the debate, I want to make a comment on motions of no confidence. I regard them as serious matters, not something to be brought forward without good reason, and definitely not on the basis of political opportunism. Rather, they are a mechanism to hold the Government to account. It is therefore important to consider the substance of the issue before the Chamber and decide on the motion on that basis. And I do so as a member of the committee. On 17th of January 2019, the First Minister said the inquiries will be able to request whatever material they want. And I undertake today that we will provide whatever material they request. My commitment is that the Government and I will fully cooperate with it. No caveats, not speaking personally, but speaking as the head of government. There is no doubt as to the First Minister's meaning, but the Deputy First Minister appears to be wholly confused. What the committee has had is partial information, delayed information, and in some cases, no information at all. The Government has treated the committee of this Parliament with contempt. And it has treated the Parliament with contempt too. Let's not forget the 2 votes in this chamber asking for the legal advice to be provided to the committee. Simply ignored. The Lord Advocate wasn't even asked for permission to do so, to release that legal advice, because the SNP government had no intention of handing it over. Indeed, that's what the Cabinet Secretary reportedly told a meeting of the SNP group. And you could paper the walls of this chamber, presiding officer, with the endless letters from the committee to John Swinney asking to see council's advice. And at every turn, the answer was no. Then we got a summary of advice from the 31st of October onwards, written by a civil servant, not a lawyer, which was not to be published, was to be seen in a reading room, could not be referred to directly in oral evidence or in the committee report. Very secretive and very convenient. But along came the threat of a no-confidence motion, supported by the Greens for the SNP to then react. The Cabinet Secretary was then falling over himself to give us the legal advice. Well, at least some of it. Then we had a drip-drip approach, keeping back some of the legal advice until after the First Minister had appeared to give oral evidence before the committee. But I have to say, presiding officer, that it is still not all there. And I'm not being pedantic for the sake of it. There are meetings in December. There are 2 critical meetings in November, on the 2nd and the 13th, the latter involving the First Minister herself, the Permanent Secretary and the Chief of Staff, together with senior counsel. It is inconceivable that no notes were taken. The Cabinet Secretary's response to the committee and to this chamber today is that there were no minutes, but there will have been notes. There absolutely will have been notes. Scottish Government lawyers and external counsel are required to take notes. It is a matter of professional duty to do so. The notes taken by them should be released to the committee. There can be no debate about this. Absolutely none. The government have waived legal privilege over other documents. Those notes ultimately belong to the Scottish Government, and there is absolutely no reason for them not to release them immediately to the committee. Unless, of course, they do have something to hide. But the SNP government have form. They withheld documents from the judicial review, resulting in the professional embarrassment of their own senior counsel. They've withheld documents despite a search warrant in the criminal case against Alex Salmond, which is in itself a crime. And they have withheld documents from the committee. There is a pattern of behaviour here, presiding officer, and it is one of obstruction, secrecy and contempt for the institution of this Parliament. Presiding officer, the motion of no confidence may be in John Swinney, but I am clear that it is in the behaviour of the secretive National Party that is truly outrageous.
Thank you. I now call on Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much, presiding officer. It gives me no pleasure whatsoever to rise to speak in favour of this motion. We have better things to be doing with our time. By rights, we should be focused on other things right now. We're in the last days of a parliamentary term, after all, and in the teeth of a global pandemic. By rights, the Salmond inquiry should have concluded months ago, with complainers allowed to forget about this sorry business. It didn't, and so they haven't. And by rights, the disclosure of all relevant material and evidence to our committee shouldn't have ever been an issue for parliamentary debate, given that the First Minister promised our inquiry ready and total access to the documents we needed. Presiding officer, it is entirely due to the obstruction and sleight of hand deployed by this administration that we have arrived at this point, and Liberal Democrats have no confidence in this Deputy First Minister. Ahead of the First Minister's appearance before our committee, her deputy assured us that, and the watching public, that all relevant legal advice had been disclosed in good time for her to answer to it, but the worst of it appeared after the fact. That was bad faith on the part of the Deputy First Minister. My colleagues and I could have and would have asked different questions of the First Minister had we seen on Tuesday that which was delivered to us on Thursday and on Friday. Those documents revealed the enormity of the embarrassment to senior counsel, and their threat to resign was only confirmed in documents received late last week. But, Presiding Officer, what has been provided to date is one thing. What's missing is something else entirely. Ruth Davidson and Jackie Bailey have both highlighted several meetings and consultations without minute. The meeting of November 13th is critical because that obviously had in its attendance the First Minister and the Permanent Secretary, and coming as it did just a fortnight after senior counsel had told the government it was likely going to lose and probably should concede. In that same advice from 31st October, Roddy Dunlop QC had told the government that folding then could allow the government to restart the complaints handling process, offering the women at the heart of this fair hearing and with appropriate safeguards in place. I asked the First Minister about this when she came to our committee, and she confirmed that the women were never notified about this possibility and their views were never sought. The government was at a crossroads in those vital days, and the advice received and the decisions taken at that meeting could have shaped the final outcome entirely. The optics for a government already mired in accusations of cover-up over this are terrible. Either explanation could point to a breach of the ministerial code. Not taking a minute is a breach in and of itself, but far worse, the minutes of these meetings could have been deliberately held back from our committee to protect the First Minister in hiding a more ruinous breach on her part. We will never know. It is astonishing to learn also that perhaps even council are unable to produce notes of this meeting, so we will have no idea of their readout whatsoever. Presiding Officer, I do not harbour personal animosity to John Swinney, but this is the second time he has tested the confidence of this Parliament. And while he may escape with his job intact today, I wish to put him on notice that there may indeed be a third. A motion in the name of Willie Rennie was passed by this chamber last month, compelling John Swinney to release the OECD review into secondary education. To this date, he has not done so. Once again, Presiding Officer, the Deputy First Minister stands in contempt of this Parliament, and once again, he may be subjected to its judgment if he does not produce it in short order. So I say to Mr Swinney, act on the instruction of this Parliament on the production of the OECD report, or we will be back here next week or the week after with a similar motion, and you may not be so certain of Green Party support on that issue.
Thank you. And can I now call on Patrick Harvey? Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Greens supported the creation of the Committee on the Government's Handling of Harassment Complaints, and we wanted to see it focus on that important issue, to understand the challenges, identify what went wrong, and ensure that improvements are made for the future. Because addressing the failings, both real and perceived, in that process is vital for giving people who wish to complain about inappropriate behaviour the confidence to do so and the reassurance that they'll be treated with respect. But what should have been an inquiry strictly focused on that issue of how allegations are handled was allowed to become nothing more than shabby political theatre. In my view, there are members who should have been focused on the interests of complainants in the past and in the future, but who have clearly been more obsessed with the idea of winning a political scalp. The effect of this has been to set back the objectives that we should all share. As Emma Rich of Engender has said, one of the things women are most attuned to when making complaints is the prospect of losing control over the process. What has happened with the Salmon inquiry has magnified this, that you could find yourself at the centre of a national scandal where people feel free to impugn your motives, and everything you want to talk about becomes about party politics or the Constitution. Many others have expressed similar concerns. Despite these concerns, toward the end of last year, when Parliament was asked to vote on the need for legal advice to be provided to the committee, the Scottish Greens backed that position. We were right to do so. And if John Swinney had dug in his heels and continued to refuse, his position would have been untenable. Equally untenable is the position of those who demanded the First Minister's resignation before even hearing her evidence, and those who last week described the published legal advice as damning and a crushing blow, but now say that it's insufficient to draw conclusions. The Conservatives in particular have allowed a committee inquiry, which should be focused on serious matters, to descend to political farce. And why? I think it's because they have nothing else to offer the people of Scotland, no positive vision of our country's future. All they have is a desperate attempt to weave conspiracy theories. In appearing to take as unquestionable truth every word that came from the lips of Alex Salmond, they've ended up sounding exactly the same as the Stuanon cultists of Mr. Salmond's own fan base. Both the former First Minister's behaviour and the government's attitude throughout this inquiry have played a large part in this debacle. But those using conspiracy theories to attack their opponents or promoting delusional ideas of Scotland being some kind of corrupt, failed state really need to ask themselves how on earth they ever expect to lift Scottish politics up from this low point they have brought us to. Presiding Officer, when the committee finally produces its long overdue report, I will be looking only at the issues of substance, which address the question of why complainants raising allegations of harassment were failed and how we can ensure that this never happens again. I sincerely hope that the committee chooses, even at this late stage, to focus on that. The shallow game of winning political scalps should not be anyone's priority, and the Greens will have no part in it.
Thank you, Mr Harvey. And can I now call on Miles Briggs to wind up our debate?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, I grew up in the village of Bankfoot in Perthshire, and I can remember the first politician I ever met was at primary school. He was our local MP, John Swinney. Now, I know that from friends and family who still live in Perthshire and colleagues from across this chamber, including myself, that John Swinney is a respected man. But that is not what this debate or this motion is about today. It is about the total disrespect that we have seen from this SNP government for a committee of this Parliament. And it is, after all, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, that tasked John Swinney to oversee this investigation and to give the committee access to all information that it requested. Now, after 2 years, does anyone sitting in this chamber today actually seriously believe that that has happened? It is little wonder, therefore, that the cross-party MSPs on this committee do not now believe that we will fully understand what went on in government or within the SNP. Now, I'd like to pay tribute to the MSP colleagues who sit on that committee for the work which they have attempted to undertake to get this legal advice over the last 2 years. As Jackie Bailey has stated last week, in my 22 years in Parliament, I have never been so obstructed, unable to do my job as I have been on this committee. That should speak to all of us. The Parliament has voted by majority on 2 separate occasions for SNP ministers to publish legal advice and provide the committee with all the evidence which has been requested, all the evidence which they have requested, which has not been provided. In both cases, I've only got 4 minutes, so no. In both cases, the Deputy First Minister ignored the votes of this chamber, and only after this vote of no confidence was put forward and put on the table have we seen the government provide the committee with some limited information. As late as yesterday, the committee convener was writing to request ministers publish notes and emails regarding 17 meetings held with lawyers as a matter of urgency. Linda Fabiani, the convener of the committee, said it was not reassured it has received all relevant information. Presiding Officer, at every single turn, SNP ministers have evaded the committee's request for evidence, redacted key information and disrespected the will of this Parliament. So the question is this: who in government will take responsibility? Presiding Officer, SNP ministers are undermining the credibility of our Scottish Parliament and the ability of this Parliament to hold the government to account. As has already been said, Deputy Presiding Officer, the Deputy First Minister may indeed survive this vote of no confidence tonight, but the damage the SNP have inflicted on this institution will be longer term. And so I hope in the coming weeks, when the First Minister and Deputy First Ministers do finally take responsibility for this scandal, I hope they will reflect on the damage which they have done to the integrity of our Parliament, our Crown Office and the Permanent Secretary. I move the motion in my name.
Thank you very much, colleagues. That concludes our debate on the motion of no confidence. The vote on this matter will be taken at decision time, which is 8 o'clock this evening. We're now going to move on to the next item of business. There will be a short pause while we do so. Just remind all members who do have to leave just to follow the one-way systems, wear their masks and observe social distancing rules. Thank you. Is that a point of order from Jackie Bailey? Point of order?
It is a point of order, and I regret having to make it, but I tried to intervene on the Cabinet Secretary. He wouldn't let me do so. I would like to establish if there are indeed notes of these meetings as opposed to minutes.
Thank you very much, Ms Bailey. That's not a point of order from me for the Chair. The point has been, I'm sure, noted by the Government and will be taken account of. It's not a point for the Chair. Thank you. We'll have a short pause while we change seats.